Have you driven through Nebraska recently? What overcrowding? Drive through there. Have you seen the empty quarter in Arabia? Drive through there. What overcrowding? Big vast sections of Australia. What overcrowding? But it's not overcrowding in what they're thinking of. They're thinking of population control, culling. The same way that they cull cows and sheep and other animals. You've got to cull, get you under control. Because you're living in a time where Muslims, as they began to reproduce, they would obviously be more than their colonial masters, which was a danger. So we've got to keep them at an even keel where we can control them with superior weaponry and numbers. Otherwise, we're going to have tribulations. In the aftermath of the European Civil War, the First European Civil War, the winners stipulated that Germany must pay for the war at a rate of 132 billion gold marks at 2.5 billion marks papier per year. They're never going to pay for it. The whole point was to humiliate Germany. Now think about this. Some of the math geniuses in here. Look at the number, 132 billion gold marks. 2.5 billion a year, what a bargain. Are you ever going to be able to pay that off? Now remember, there's also interest because these aren't Muslims. They're going to charge you interest. So if you compound that at maybe, 15% at a good rate APR, now all of a sudden it's 250. You can pay back 2.5 billion a year or a few billion a year. Are you ever going to be able to clear that? No, because the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War was not just to make Germany fit the bill for the war cost of the European Civil War I. It was to destroy the Germans as an effective military power, to punish the German people, to divide the nation. And that's what it was done for. And this same time, in 1341, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, the union of the Latin nations that compose those is dissolved in 1341. Howard Carter continued the great British tradition of looting Egyptian artifacts from tombs and family crypts, and Mahatma Gandhi began his civil disobedience mission. So Howard Carter was in a long tradition of British looters. They'd come to Egypt, heard about the vast wealth of the pharaohs, even though it wasn't their wealth, even though the bodies weren't theirs. They broke into the crypts, and each crypt they stole the bodies to put on display in a museum, and stole all the wealth. And to this day, they will not give the Egyptians back, the Egyptian Antiquities Department, they won't give them back the sarcophagi that they've stolen, the emblems that they've stolen, or even the jeweled penis of King Tutankhamun that they stole and cut from the body. Now, I'm not sure what use they had for this, but they refused to give it back. Now, I want you to think very carefully. If, for some reason, next year, Winston Churchill's body went on display in Karachi, you and I think, would be privy to national outcry. But why is there a national outcry if Princess Diana goes on display in all color, stark naked, in whatever Muslim country that you choose? Let's try Libya, Riyadh maybe. Goes on display, everybody can look at it. £2 a ticket, that's fair. This is horrible, this is a disgrace, this is a travesty. These are our national treasures. This is someone's father, someone's mother. You don't think that sarcophagus that's got someone in there is someone's mother? Some people claim lineage to King Tutankhamun. Some people claim lineage to him and say, listen, you can't put him in there. But it's because it's them. Remember back to what I mentioned about the cut off skin of that Native American hung up in that lodge in Colorado. I'm not going to take that down. That's been passed through my family for more than 100 years. Not because it's wrong to have human skin hung up, but it's because it's been hung up there for all these years. I'm not taking it down. That's a souvenir piece for crying out loud. Remember the mentality of the people that you're dealing with, because it will come into play later. Now, in 1342, Mustafa Kemal, by this time, had changed his name to something more Turkish. Kemal Ataturk, the father of the Turks. And he became the president of the newly created country called Turkey or Turkiya. Disney Studios would also be founded in the same year. Germans had great bitterness at the thought that $1 American was worth 4 quadrillion papier marks. It was horrible, their inflation. One German man mentioned in a newspaper that he had a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks, or full of papier marks, and went inside the bank to ask them what their going rate was, came back outside, and the wheelbarrow had been stolen because it was worth more than the papier marks that had been put inside of it. That's how shocking the inflation was. And then after that came the 1929 crash in their calendar, which was in the 1350s, that's massive crash, which brought the world into a state of depression. And out of all the blood and guts and gore of that, rose Hitler with the idea that we can create a better German economy, first of all, by killing all the other people that are in these fields and freeing up employment opportunities. Because if you kill everyone in the employment sector, you've got employment, don't you? Classified ads are full. You have to think properly with logic. Think properly. You just kill everyone else off. If all of the Asians disappeared from the culinary arts and cabbing and barristership and all these other important jobs, wow, with an Asian-free UK, there's jobs for everyone. It's gone. No more Jamaicans driving the underground in London. There's jobs galore for the world. And this is precisely what Hitler would later do when he came into power. Now, Adolf Hitler, along with a core group of people, attempted to overthrow the government but failed and were given 8 months in jail for the move that they made. He became a local hero and began writing his life story, which would later be called Mein Kampf, My Struggle. In 1343 AH, the Alawi cult members murdered French ministering nuns, and the French army invaded in response and killed them. The Muwahidun cult by this time had taken the name Ad-Da'watu Salafiyya in Egypt under Muhammad Abdu. This is where this expression Ad-Da'watu Salafiyya. The first one to use this expression was a man by the name of Muhammad Abdu, who died in 1905. You may want to read a book called Modern Egypt by Lord Cromer. If you look in the index under all the sections under Muhammad Abdu, there is enormous citation on how heavily Salafiyya in Egypt was bankrolled. Evelyn Baring, also known as Lord Cromer, says, I put every financial masterpiece at my disposal and poured all of my financial energies into Muhammad Abdu and his movement. All of his financial energies. And they created 2 wings within Salafiyya. One of, well, I'm Salafi in my creed, but I'm Hanafi in my fiqh. Like Muhammad Abdu, I'm Hanafi, but I'm Salafi in my creed. I follow madhabs, but when I find a stronger evidence, well, I dump the madhab and I follow the stronger evidence. And then you found Muhammad Rashid Rida, a far more vociferous and vicious, a more vicious form of Salafi. No, the madhabs are bid'ah, they're batil, and this is holding with Muhammad Abdul Wahhab's position. But they created these 2 rims, which would be easier to introduce to the population. Oh no, we're Hanafis, or we're Shafi'is, or we're whatever, but we're the real Hanafis. Because when we get the evidences, we find that Abu Hanifa goes against an evidence, well, we do what he says, and we drop the evidence, and we follow the hadith. And this is what they started doing. Muhammad Rashid Rida was for the more stringently minded. And they made this dichotomy. And this is how Ad-Da'wah Salafiyya was born in Egypt, because the grandsons of Muhammad Abdul Wahhab that had pretended that they'd repented of their Muwahidun creed were teaching in prisons to visitors and other people, and it spread. And when they left and went to Kuwait, the damage had already been done. And that's why you find in the 20th century, after the Saudi monarchy, the strongest Salafis are Egyptians. Do your homework. Osama bin Laden's spiritual advisor, Ayman Zawahiri, an Egyptian. The one who took over the Muslim Brotherhood of Salafiyah, an Egyptian. Jama'at al-Jihad, Egyptians. GIA, the idea inspired for Jama'at al-Islamiyyah al-Musallaha, Egyptians. In this century, the Egyptians, which previously had been a force for good, were one of the most wicked contributions into the Muslim world and helped to destroy it. And were used, starting with Abdu and others. And so I don't chide you when I say some of the things that I say, because it is a very severe matter what took place. Now, the Salafi cult members swept down from Kuwait, formerly stolen by the British from Iraq and named Granj, and took Riyadh while engaged in massive warfare with the Rashidiyah, a clan of scholars and warriors loyal to the Ottomans but losing ground and resources. The Rashidiyah were the last force to be conquered by ad-da'wah to Salafiyah. They killed everything in their path, devastated everything. They were the last group to resist this movement. And they were killed down to a few men, the Rashidiyah. Mein Kampf, My Struggle, was published in 1344. And what was to come 20 years later was laid out in clear detail. If anyone gets an opportunity, it's not light reading. But if anyone gets an opportunity, just to understand historically what happened in old Europe, read Mein Kampf and then read the history of World War II from 29 on. And it unfolds exactly. The only difference was what happened in Russia, with the fact that the winter came early and then he suffered a setback and then he had a string of defeats. But the whole layout, taking Czechoslovakia, attempted extermination of the Poles, the Jewish question, all these other issues, Palestinians and Arabs, what are we going to do with those people? Because once we finished off and exterminated these people, we've got to do something with them. Because there were concentration camps in preparation in what's today's Saudi and in Egypt. To do what? Well, obviously to deal with the Palestinian and the Arab problem. They weren't going to go away overnight, were they? There's 120 million of those little guys. Got to get rid of them. Do your homework. Because it was a real situation. And when these issues were released in English, they were edited versions. But Mein Kampf is pretty much the words of a megalomaniac. A megalomaniac is someone that tells you, first I'm going to cut you, then I'm going to tie you up, then I'm going to kill you, then I'm going to beat you, then I'm going... It tells you everything that he's going to do. And you have a full manual of, this is what I've got on my wish list for 20 years. And most of old Europe thought, he's just some raving old colonel, he's angry. He's got a lot of bitterness from World War I. But he's actually putting into place what he's going to do. Joins the National Socialismo movement, starts building up strength from there, and everything starts to go haywire. Everything starts to go haywire. Now, moving on from that, Abdul Aziz ibn Saud became the king of Hijaz in 1345 and utterly massacred the Rashidiyah in a brutal extermination campaign that earned Salafiyah, even today, its fearsome reputation for not respecting the bodies of other Muslims. Only a handful of Rashidiyah remained to hope for their revenge on that cult one day in the future. 1356 to 1362, the European Civil War, the Second European Civil War, took place, leading to the death of 55 million people. You had gypsies, millions of gypsies. Some numbers state between 6 and 9 million Jews. There's a lot of literature on it from sources such as the Deborah Lipstadt report, which goes into a lot of the paperwork and the evidence. One of the things about both the Chinese extermination of 40 million Muslims that occurred around the same time and the extermination of between 6 to 9 million Jews is how meticulous they kept records. I mean, I think the Chinese in their extermination of Muslims, where he actually said in his Red Book, we want provinces liquidated. We want empty provinces.